My wedding day was only a month later. 2 nights before the wedding, I was in bed, asleep. My wedding dress was in the room. It was a windy night. The wind made a strange sound. Suddenly, I woke up. There was a light in the room. I thought it was morning, but it was still dark outside. Someone was in my room. Was it Mrs. Fairfax? Was it Grace Poole? It was neither of them. It was a woman. But I didn't know her. She was a big woman, tall and strong. Her black hair was long and thick. Her clothes were long and white. At first, I didn't see her face. She took my dress and held it in front of her. She looked at herself in the mirror. Then I saw her face. It was the most terrible face. The woman's eyes were large and red, and her face was purple. She looked angry, cruel, and frightening. Then she took my dress and angrily tore it to pieces. She threw the pieces of the dress on the floor. Next, she went to the window and looked out. Then she started to come towards my bed. I was so frightened that I couldn't move. I couldn't scream for help. I lay still in bed. Is she going to kill me? I thought. But suddenly the light disappeared and the room went dark. When I woke up, it was morning. The sun was shining. At once, I remembered that strange and frightening woman. Did it all really happen, or was it a dream? Did she really come into my room in the middle of the night? Then I saw my wedding dress. It was laying on the floor, torn to pieces. I picked up the pieces of the dress, so it was all true. That terrible woman was real. When I told Mr. Rochester about the woman and showed him my dress, he looked very worried and was silent for a long time. "Jane, I think you had a bad dream," he said at last. "I think it was perhaps Grace Poole who really tore your dress. But in your dream it was some stranger." I wasn't sure about this, but I said nothing. That night, the night before the wedding, I slept in Adele's room. My wedding day came and we went to the church, but the wedding didn't happen. In the church, while the clergyman was speaking, someone threw open the doors at the back and shouted, "Stop the wedding! Mr. Rochester cannot get married. He's got a wife already. He's married to my sister." Everybody in the church turned round to see the speaker. It was Mr. Mason, the man from the West Indies. But who was his sister? How could Mr. Rochester be married? I couldn't believe it. My heart turned to ice. I looked at Mr. Rochester. His face was white and hard, but he didn't say that Mr. Mason was mistaken. "But where is Mr. Rochester's wife, your sister?" the clergyman asked Mr. Mason. "Where does she live?" "She lives at Thornfield Hall," answered Mr. Mason. "She's still alive. I saw her there last April." "At Thornfield Hall?" the clergyman said. "But I know of no Mrs. Rochester at Thornfield Hall. There must be some mistake." Mr. Rochester was silent for a long time. "I can explain," he said at last. "I'll tell you everything. It's true. My wife is living at Thornfield Hall. We got married 15 years ago in the West Indies when I was a young man. My wife's name was Bertha Mason. She's Mason's sister. Soon after the wedding, Bertha became very strange. Slowly, she became mad and dangerous. She wanted to kill me, and she tried to kill anybody who came near her. Last April, she tried to kill her brother, Mr. Mason. Nobody knows about Bertha. Nobody knows that she's my wife. This young lady, Jane Eyre, knows nothing about her. A nurse, Grace Poole, looks after Bertha. Mr. Rochester's face was dark and serious. "Come with me," he said. "Now I'll take you all to see her." We all left the church. Without speaking, we returned to Thornfield Hall. When we got there, Mr. Rochester took us up to the attic. He took out a key and unlocked the door. Grace Poole was there, and in the room with her, there was frightening woman, the terrible woman that I saw in my bedroom, the person with the cruel, mad laugh. She was the person who tried to kill Mr. Mason and who set fire to Mr. Rochester's room. She was mad, but she was Mr. Rochester's wife, and I couldn't marry him. Poor Mr. Rochester, I felt sorry for him, but I couldn't now stay at Thornfield Hall. I must leave my home forever, I thought with a heavy heart. I can never come back, and I'll never see Mr. Rochester again. Sadly, I put a few ordinary clothes into a small bag. I didn't take my beautiful new clothes. I took a little money and quietly left Thornfield Hall early one morning. I didn't say goodbye to anybody, and nobody saw me leave. I wanted to travel as far away from Thornfield as I could. I spent all my money. I travelled for 2 days and nights until at last I arrived at a place where there was no towns or villages and very few houses. I had no money now to buy food. I was very tired, very hungry. It was evening and it was getting dark. I could see only one house. I went to the house and looked through the window. There was 2 young women in the room. They looked kind, so I knocked on the door. A servant opened it. "Who are you?" she asked. "What do you want?" "I'm a stranger," I said. "I haven't any money or food. I'm tired and hungry. Please, help me." The servant looked at me for a long time. "I'll give you some bread," she answered at last. "But then you must go away." She left me and came back with a piece of bread. "Now go," she said. "You can't stay here." But I was too tired to move. I sat down on the ground by the door. "Nobody will help me. I'll die." I didn't know, but someone was listening and watching me. "You won't die," he said. "Who are you?" I looked up and I saw a tall young man. He knocked loudly on the door. The servant opened it again. "Hannah?" the man asked. "Who is this young woman?" "I don't know," said the servant Hannah. "I told her to go away, but she's still there. Go away," she said to me. "No, Hannah, she can't go away. She's ill, and she needs our help. She must come inside," the man said. They took me in the house. The room was warm. The 2 young women came to talk to me. "What's your name?" they asked. "My name's Jane Elliot," I said. I didn't want anyone to know my real name. I didn't want Mr. Rochester to find me. I wanted to start again. My new friends gave me some food and took me to a bedroom where I slept for a long time. After a few days, I felt better and I was able to talk to my kind new friends. The names were Diana and Mary Rivers. The man was their brother. His name was St. John Rivers, and he was a clergyman. St. John was a very handsome young man with fair hair and blue eyes. He was always very serious. He didn't often laugh or smile. He was planning to go to India to work. His sisters were more friendly, but I didn't want to tell them about Mr. Rochester. I thanked them for their kindness. "I have no family," I said. "My parents are both dead. I was at Lowood School for 6 years. After that, I got a job with a family, but I had to leave suddenly. I didn't do anything wrong. Please believe me." "Don't talk now," said Diana. "You're tired." "You'll want a new job now," said St. John. "Yes," I replied, "as soon as possible." "Good. I'll help you." A month later, Diana and Mary left their home to work as teachers in the south of England. St. John asked me to teach the children who lived near his church. They were poor children and the school was very small. I was the only teacher. I enjoyed my work. I didn't have much money and I had to work very hard. I lived in a very small house near the school. There weren't many people there, but St. John was very kind and gave me books to read. In my free time, I read and painted pictures. Sometimes St. John visited me in the evenings. One evening, he came to my house when I was just finishing a painting. He looked at some of my pictures, then he looked again, more closely, at one of the paintings. Without saying anything, he tore a piece of paper off the bottom of the painting and put it carefully into his pocket. Then quite suddenly he left. I was very surprised. What a strange person he was. The next day it snowed. I thought no visitors would come that day, but in the evening there was a knock on the door. It was St. John. He was wet and cold. "Why have you come? Is there bad news?" I asked. "Are your sisters all right?" "Don't worry. There is no bad news. Diana and Mary are both well," he answered. He sat down in front of the fire. I waited, but he said nothing. How strange he is, I thought. Why did he come here when the weather is so bad? Perhaps he's bored. His sisters are far away. St. John sat and thought for a long time. At last he spoke. "I know your story," St. John said. "I know about your parents and about Mrs. Reed. I know about Lowood School, and I know about Thornfield Hall, and about Mr. Rochester. I also know about Mr. Rochester's wife, so now I know why you came here without any money. I know why you left Thornfield Hall. Mr. Rochester must be a very bad man." "Oh, no he isn't," I said. "I've had a letter," said St. John, "from a man in London called Mr. Briggs. He wants to find you. He asked about Jane Eyre. You call yourself Jane Elliot, but I know your real name is Jane Eyre. Look." St. John showed me a piece of paper. It was the piece of paper from the bottom of my painting. My real name, Jane Eyre, was on it. "Did Mr. Briggs say anything about Mr. Rochester?" I asked. "How's Mr. Rochester?" I only wanted to know about Mr. Rochester. I still loved him. Mr. Briggs doesn't know anything about Mr. Rochester, said St. John. He wrote to me about your uncle, Mr. Eyre of Madeira. Your uncle is dead. He's left you all his money. You're a very rich young woman. For a long time I was too surprised to speak. I was rich now, but I wasn't excited. I tried to understand what it meant to be rich. I can't understand, I said at last. Why did Mr. Briggs write to you? Because, St. John said, Mr. Eyre of Madeira was also our uncle. He was my mother's brother. When he died, he left all his money to you, Jane Eyre. Then you, Diana, Mary, you're my cousins, I said. This is wonderful news. Our uncle's money is for all of us. Diana and Mary can come home and we can live all together. It was good to have money, but it was even better to have 3 cousins. So just before Christmas, Diana and Mary came home. I worked hard to make their old house comfortable. Diana and Mary will like it, I thought. But what about St. John? He's a strange man. He's like stone, hard and cold. He's pleased to see his sisters, but still he doesn't really look happy. Diana, Mary and I began to live quietly and comfortably together. St. John still wanted to go to India. I was happy living with my cousins, but I still thought about Mr. Rochester every day. Where was he? Was he happy? I wrote to the lawyer, Mr. Briggs, but Mr. Briggs knew nothing about Mr. Rochester. Then I wrote to Mrs. Fairfax at Thornfield Hall. I waited for a letter from her, but no letter came. I wrote to Mrs. Fairfax again. Perhaps she didn't get my first letter. Again, there was no answer. At last, a letter did come for me, but it was only a letter from Mr. Briggs about my uncle's money. I began to cry. While I was crying, St. John came into the room and saw me. "Jane," he said, "come for a walk with me." "No, don't call Diana and Mary. I want to talk to you." We walked along the side of the river. At first, St. John said nothing. At last, he turned to me. "Jane, I'm going to India in 6 weeks, and I want you to come with me." I was surprised. Why did St. John want me to go to India with him? How could I help him? I wasn't strong and serious like him. "As your helper?" I asked. "I don't think... No, not as my helper, as my wife. I want to marry you, so that we can work together in India. There are many poor people there. They need our help." Now, I was even more surprised. I felt sure that St. John didn't love me, and I didn't want to marry him. I couldn't marry him. I still loved Mr. Rochester. "But I can't go to India," I said. "I don't know how to help the people there. I'm not like you." St. John looked at me seriously. "Oh, that doesn't matter. I'll tell you what to do, and you'll quickly learn. You always worked hard in the village school. You'll work hard in India too." I thought for a long time St. John, my cousin, needed my help. He was going to do very useful work in India. At last, I continued. "Perhaps I can help you, but I must be free. I can't marry you. You're like my brother," I said. St. John looked at me. His handsome face was cold and serious, like stone. "That's not possible. You must be my wife. I don't want a sister. I don't want you to marry another man. I want you to stay with me, to work with me until we die. I felt cold and sad. I remembered my love for Mr. Rochester and the way he always spoke to me. St. John was different. He wanted me to marry him, but I knew he didn't love me. I wanted to help him, but not to marry him. He was a good man, but I didn't love him. I didn't know what to say to him. I'm going away for 2 weeks, St. John continued. When I come back, I want your answer. I hope you'll decide to marry me. You can't just stay here doing nothing. When I went back into the house, Diana spoke to me. Jane, you look unhappy. Your face is white. What's happening? I told her. St. John asked me to marry him. But that's wonderful, she said. Now he'll stay in England. He won't go to India. He'll stay here with us. No, I said. He wants me to go to India with him. But you can't go to India, she said. You aren't strong enough. I won't go, I told her, because I can't marry St. John, and now I'm afraid he's angry with me. He's a good man, but he doesn't understand how ordinary people feel. I know, Diana said. Our brother is a very good man, but he sometimes seems cold and hard. That night, I thought about St. John for a long time. I didn't know what to do. I didn't love him, and he didn't love me. But perhaps I could help him in India. I didn't know what to do. The night was very quiet. Suddenly, I thought I heard a voice. Jane! 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 It called. It was Mr. Rochester's voice. Where are you? I cried, but there was no answer. There was no one there. Was it only a dream? No, I knew that somewhere, far away, Mr. Rochester needed me. I must go and find him, I thought.